Hello everyone and welcome to the Wex YouTube channel. We're here today with Marianne Chua, who is a wedding photographer and so much more. So what I'm going to do is start with an introduction. So Marianne, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Marianne Chua and I've been a wedding photographer basically for about 8 years, and I'm based in London, although I'm kind of doing this live interview right now from my sort of in-laws in Cornwall, sunny Cornwall. Yeah, I sort of specialise in sort of what we used to call back then like alternative kind of wedding photography, but it's more documentary with like a fun twist and moving away from that traditional sort of wedding photography. I also do some event photography, like general event photography, and family portraits and things like that. But I think today we'll just talk about the wedding stuff, won't we, really?
Yes, exactly. So I know you've got a slideshow of beautiful images that you've taken. So we'll have that playing in the background for those of you who are wondering what it is that's playing. But first of all, let's get the Wex question out of the way at the very beginning. What kit do you use?
I'm a full Fujifilm user, and at weddings I shoot with two X-T3s and a series of prime lenses. I use the 16 1.4, the 23 1.4, 56 1.2, and the 90 f2. And mostly I use the 23 1.4 and 56 1.2, but pretty much like I'm going to say like 90% of the day. And for me, that's kind of like the long and the wide, and I keep them on the two bodies and I dual shoot. And then I will use like the 90 f2 for more like when I'm in a big church and I need that reach. It's not to say that I really love like a tight crop. So for me, it's more using the longer focal length to kind of do the same sort of framing. And then I will use the 16 more for like close-up dance floor stuff. And some spaces just need it, you know, when you want to widen the room, just to do like the sort of venue scene setting sort of image. So yeah.
Can I ask, so obviously that's a lot of gear, which I know in wedding photography, definitely I've seen bigger kit bags than in other sort of areas of photography. Can I ask, do you shoot alone, or do you bring like an assistant? Do you work sort of with a runner?
So I pretty much always shoot alone, and I offer a second shooter on my website. More people need to book it in based on what their wedding really requires. So as we'll probably go into today in more detail, I shoot like a really wide variety of weddings, different religions, different cultures, and sometimes like the guest numbers can range anything. I think the smallest number of guests I've shot for has been, well, I guess there was 3 people and then me as the 4th witness. Maybe with wedding guests, we're looking at 6 to 12 people. So I think the largest thing we've done is about 700 people. So something like the 700 person wedding, anything above like sort of 200 people, or when they have cultural events that require sort of me a photographer being in 2 different places at the same time, that's when I'll have a second shooter. But otherwise, most of the year it is just me. And I think, well, I mean, it's part of why I moved to Fujifilm anyway, that the kit's very light, and I fit everything in one rucksack. And I do have some light stands and sort of my flash equipment that I didn't really mention, but I'll carry that in sort of all shoulder-based bags. So a lot of the time, because I'm a city sort of based photographer, sometimes in the countryside, but most of the time I'm on public transport and I'm sort of on a bus or something, or on a train with all the guests and the couple. I'm trying to shoot as I go and tell that story as I go. So I feel like of all the wedding photography kits, it's probably the lightest you'll get, really. It's kind of what Fujifilm's known for and what people go to it for, really. So yeah.
Amazing. So you mentioned that, I know we're going to come on to the variations of weddings that you shoot, but the first thing I wanted to kind of talk to you about is your style. So obviously, although you shoot so many different scenarios and different kinds of weddings, obviously you have this really bold and unique style. And I sort of wondered if you could talk to us about how that came about, or more so how you would describe your own style if I was to force you to.
So putting aside like the content of what I like to shoot and the kind of people I end up shooting for, just thinking about the way I shoot, that was something that took, I think I would say, a few years to develop. When I first started, I think the only thing I really understood about weddings is that it involved people, and I've seen people wanting me to get photos of people being happy and stuff. So I focused a lot on emotions, and that was always there right from the start. But then I would say maybe in like year 3 or 4ish, I started to think about crafting like an aesthetic to it, or things that appealed. And a lot of it was born out of literally like what kind of things I liked when I watched movies, and like I'm a big Wes Anderson fan, which probably comes through in terms of there's a lot of symmetry, and there's a lot of like mirroring things and stuff like that. And there's a lot of people kind of right up here, and then someone small in the background, and a lot of this sort of like horizon based framing. So I know he's kind of popular, but anyway, that's probably a very big influence just in terms of what I find aesthetically pleasing. I would say yes, it's bright and colourful, because in my head I feel like things should be true to life, but just a little bit bolder, a little bit more enhanced. So aside from like the first year where I had some really dodgy, really over heavily filtered editing, apart from that, literally my editing's been very similar with a bit of fine tuning over time. I think I said at the beginning that I shoot in documentary style primarily, because I think for me as a person, the way I like to be shot, I'm not really into posing anyway. I'm like a photographer, but really I don't love having my photo taken, and I would say I'm quite awkward with it, and my partner is as well. So I do this type of photography on the basis that I understand that there are people out there who kind of need to have photos taken but don't really want to have their photo taken, and that's part of my client base. So the documentary style is something that I would definitely say defines me. I do sometimes do couple shots and group shots more out of what I think that's what people do need to a degree, just to sort of please the parents is kind of what I'd say, and most people who book me will kind of agree with that. So
yeah, absolutely. One thing I find really interesting about your work is that everybody looks like a film star, and what I mean by that is they all look absolutely stunning, like even sort of the people in the background. And I wondered if you could talk to us about sort of how, first of all, like what your aim is when you're shooting weddings and how you select your weddings, and then second of all, I guess, how you go about sort of capturing the best of people in those environments.
So I mean, I sort of feel like when people talk about what is beautiful wedding photography, I'm kind of a bit of a stick in the mud about it, because I on a personal level, before I do weddings, I feel very strongly that so for context, I feel I should rewind a bit. Before I did wedding photography, I was a psychologist, and I did that. That was, I kind of went to uni at 18, and I did that, and I did a few degrees in it. And my aim was always to be a clinical psychologist, and I worked a lot with like young people, and especially with like young girls with eating disorders and things like that. So it was always two things that always stood out to me. Was one that I think it really matters in terms of like young people's self-esteem and sort of their well-being. All of that is quite important to me, and I could see the impact and of like society and media and imagery on people's self-esteem. So when I went into an industry where I'm creating images, it just seemed obvious to me that I'm not interested in taking photos that would fit a definition of beauty that I sort of felt previously was like potentially damaging for young people. From buying into that culture, I would say. So when I think of what is a beautiful picture, I am just looking for human emotions, and I just do feel like, regardless of people's size, look, aesthetic, skin color, whatever it is, when people look beautiful, it's just because they look happy. And anyway, on your wedding day, like you should, it's meant to be like, on the happiest days of your life. So if you can't get it there, then where else are you going to get it? And going back to psychology thing, that was something else that came out of my sort of life with photography, that I was very, because I worked with people with mental health issues, I was always kind of very comfortable with, and I would say, not celebrating is the wrong word, but I was very appreciative of individual differences between people. So to me, I don't sort of think of things as this person is different and it's weird, or like those sorts of words. I'm interested in it, and I'm like, I just think it's a really wonderful part of human beings, really, that we can be so different and we have so many different personalities. And so when it comes to weddings, I feel like it's like a human phenomenon where people have chosen to do something kind of in a way like quite big, really, to say that I want to spend the rest of my life with this person, and I'm taking that leap of faith with someone. There's something really I don't want to use the word magical, because I feel like that's going to be really cheesy, but there is something there. I think there is something that we shouldn't take for granted with that, and in the animal kingdom, and we are animals, in the animal kingdom, you know, people don't, like a lot of animals don't, you know, do that. They don't like stay together for life. And when we look at animals that stay together for life, we always think of it as a very cute, endearing, loving thing. And we are people, but we are animals that do that. So, you know, I think weddings and marriages are kind of a wonderful part of that. And the differences in the way we choose to display it is that's something that's quite unique to humans. The fact that we have this sort of event that we put on, and then we have, you know, themes, and we have traditions, and we have, you know, the ways we dress or the ways we choose to display it. So yeah, I think all of that sort of defines the way I work and the way I see weddings.
It's really interesting, because one thing that I absolutely love about your images is that they're so different in terms of the variety of people that you shoot, the types of weddings that you do. Do you feel sometimes wedding photography, I don't want to be mean about the industry, but that wedding photography has had a bit of a societal pressure to look a certain way in sort of magazines and editorial for quite a while, especially in Western culture? I guess my question would be, like, how do you feel about that? And do you feel that it's sort of on the wedding photographers to change it, or do you think it's a bigger issue that we need to talk about as an industry as a whole?
Yeah, no, 100%. I definitely feel like weddings as an industry, and the whole concept of wedding photography is sort of subject, and I guess a part of like this pressure in society, or this sort of this sort of culture in society. Because I mean, I have friends who got married, and so one friend, you know, would never be into diets at all, and she was very anti-diet, and I was quite surprised when she was getting married that she wanted to go on a diet. And I literally was like, oh, like, I've known you for so long, and like you've been so vocally anti it, but then she just somehow had got into this mindset. She was like, oh well, I will lose a bit for my wedding day, and you know, she was trim already anyway and stuff. So it just sort of struck me as like, oh, that was interesting. And similarly, I have friends who never wore makeup, like literally a day in their life, and I've known them since we were 12. And then on their wedding day, you know, they had a full face of makeup, and that was their choice, because I think for that, in that particular instant, you know, that was an Asian wedding, and I think it's kind of, again, the norm. It's not just a Western wedding thing, I would say. You know, cultures everywhere have some pressures and some norms. So she, you know, she sort of had a full face of makeup with the red lipstick and everything, and I remember thinking, oh, okay, she looks different. And I think, you know, when you go to weddings, I will caveat with this, that if you want to do something different and special on your wedding day, that's absolutely fine. I think that, but what I feel like is that it should be people's choice, and people should, and I think there is a cohort of people out there who don't want to conform, and they don't want to feel like they have to do things a certain way as dictated by whatever's going on around them, or the sort of the magazines, what the magazines tell them to do. And I kind of want my wedding photography to sort of offer that sort of little wedge where people can come and feel like, okay, yes, this is going to be fine. I'm not going to, you know, turn up to my wedding day and have the photographer tell me that I should do this, or I should do that, or I should look a certain way. And you know, I think as wedding photographers, we're very, you know, we're more responsible for these things than when we think, because I think evidence of that is the fact when they have wedding trends, there's definitely a trend that happens. So, you know, we all know that there are years when, you know, mason jars were a thing, or like, you know, everyone was doing like a donut wall, and everyone was doing lawn games were a thing. And it's because people, when they're planning their wedding, you know, realistically, couples go and they go onto like wedding blogs, they go onto wedding websites, and they see what other people are doing, and they get ideas for what they want to do at their own wedding. But the fact that it can shift from like a couple of years will be on this, and a couple of years will be on this, and then it'll be a couple of years will be like a balloon wall, and a couple of years, you know, that says to me that what we are putting out there and showing as an industry is influencing then what couples do when they're planning their wedding. So I know it's easy to sort of feel like, oh, we just take photos and stuff, but like I do think we play a part in that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement for all forms of photography. You know, at the end of the day, like, we're the ones documenting, we're the ones putting out those images that people see, and therefore we get to choose the narrative, even if it's not our wedding or it's not our scenario. I think, you know, it must be really difficult sometimes as a wedding photographer, because I'm sure you have briefs to fulfill and things that people want, but there must be images that you want, that you see on the day. Do you sort of go off book? Do you take just as many as you want? Is it quite free? Could you talk about that a little bit?
So one thing I do is I will say to couples that, you know, I kind of outline what what they can expect from me and what I kind of offer. And the way I say it to them is that I'm not here to persuade you to book me. I'm not going to like lie to you and say, oh yeah, I can do this, I can do anything for you because I want you to book me. Because I have a belief that I think there are all different types of couples out there who have different wants, different needs, different personalities. And also there are all different types of photographers out there wanting to shoot in different ways. And it's more important for the couple to find someone that matches them than it is for me to sort of attempt to pigeonhole myself to get a booking. I'm very lucky I've been doing this long enough where every year I've been fully booked. So maybe that's a comfortable place to come at that from, you know, whereas if I maybe needed the bookings, I can understand why people would want to sort of just adapt themselves to whatever they think the client, you know, is asking for. But I kind of say to people, you know, try, if you are in a position where you can try not to do that, then that's you know, something I'd recommend, simply from the basis of your own personal satisfaction. You know, because we are self-employed, and for us it's a luxury that we kind of can technically choose our boss every single weekend, and there's no real reason why you have to work for someone who you don't agree with or see eye to eye with, or you sort of enjoy the company of, because you are there spending a lot of time with these people. And also I think genuinely, if you you know, you get on with your client and you're really happy to be there and you're getting on with all the guests, and I think you will do better work as well. So there's both the element of I think personally you'll just have a better life, but also then I think it does make you better at your job. Sorry, going back to your question, actually, I think I went off a little bit of the question. Oh yes, you were saying about how I expose couples. So I tell them what they can expect from me, but I do say, you know, so I say, like, if this is completely out of the realm of what you are looking for, like say for example, I have like a no Photoshop policy, I'll be upfront about that and make sure that they know that before booking. And I say, like, if that's not what you're after, then that's absolutely fine. You know, I can refer you on to some other names. But this is why I have this approach, and you know, it's up to you if you agree with it or not. The only thing that I would probably compromise on are stuff related to group shots and couple shots, where my approach with that is that I see it as I'm flexible, I'm there to provide what they need. When I do the documentary stuff, I kind of explain that's like the crux of what I love doing, and that's, you know, I hope that they're on board with that, because that's 95% of the content they'll get. But say for example, if they have family obligations where they have to have you know, 70 group shots, and going back to the sort of, you know, diverse weddings, that happens a lot. You know, there are some cultures where they are obliged by family, even if the couple are not really into it. Even if they want to make it silly, or they, you know, they sort of know they've still got to do this and X, Y, Z, mum and dad. I'm flexible with that, because I kind of understand that sometimes that's just what they need to do. And if, as long as they're happy with that 95% documentary section, then that's cool. So when I do, mostly I would say that applies to group shots, but my ideal world is that there aren't too many, because I think it then detracts from the couple's experience time-wise, and it detracts from my time to take the documentary shots that they've booked me for. Yeah.
Absolutely. We actually had a question come in. It's really interesting. So
yes,
somebody's asked how you deal with people, and I guess this must happen a lot, who are quite self-conscious, or maybe not so used to being the center of attention and in front of the camera.
Oh yeah, so I literally honestly would say, like, almost all my couples feel like that, because when they come to me, a lot of what I open on my website is that documentary sort of content, so they're sort of naturally going to be drawn to that. And I do get that as a question, especially even if it's not them, it's like their partner, or they're worried about their guests, or they're worried about, you know, their key family member hiding from the camera and things like that. And one thing I start off by saying, basically, just remember that, like, you're not there to be a professional model. Like, I'm not expecting you to come to your wedding and have to do this extra job. Like, the only people who are professionally meant to look good in life are professional models, right? So, you know, you don't have to worry about that. Like, it's, for me as a photographer, it's my job to kind of make you look good. And if you believe in this ethos that I'm kind of saying to you, I take on, that you look your best when you're happy, you look your best when you're enjoying yourself, then that is literally all you kind of need to do. Like, the better you can ignore me, the better that your pictures will be. And I'm also realistic with them. So I explain, like, in the first 15 minutes or so, you know, the reality is it'd be you, me, and maybe like a couple of bridesmaids or a couple of groomsmen in the room. And maybe, yeah, you will feel self-conscious about being photographed, and that's okay. Like, it's okay to feel that way. Like, you shouldn't sort of over punish yourself if you feel like you're an awkward person. But I say, you know, realistically, from my experience, once people start getting into the ceremony and they start getting close to that time, or they just get busier and everything's running late, like, you will probably just start to focus on other more important things, because realistically are not important, right? So you know, I explain that, and I also do say to them, when you are, so every couple, I should say, every couple who inquires with me, I kind of encourage them to meet me in person or book, or have a meeting online nowadays, obviously, because of what's going on. And I say that's kind of important because it's not just a chance to ask questions, but it's also a chance for you to see whether or not you get on with me as a person. Like I say to them, if you need to feel like you're comfortable with me as a person, you need to think, you know, would this person fit in amongst my guests? And that's very important to me because it allows me to do my job better. So especially if there's someone who's very self-conscious, if you encourage them to think about you as a person there, not just the photos are obviously important, but you know, you as a person there present on the day, you're there for the longest time, up in their personal space, basically doing something quite intimate with them. They need to sort of make sure that they feel like you would fit. So I would kind of maybe, you know, highlight that to them, and I think in that sense that does reassure people, because it shows to them as well that you are thinking about, you are considering their feelings, and you are displaying empathy in terms of you're sort of aware of your presence and it matters to you, and therefore they think, okay, this person is actually going to be aware and caring about how I feel on the day, having them around, having them photograph me. You know, so I hope that sort of answers it a bit.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good answer. I think it's important to remember that a wedding day is obviously really special and really intimate. And so, like, even as a photographer, although it seems like you're fulfilling a job, at the end of the day, you are in fact attending their very intimate ceremony or their very private situation. And so, yeah, I think it must be a tough one just to sort of, you know, be there in a situation where you don't know anyone, but you're also getting very close and personal with everyone involved.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think this is a really fun part of the job where you will start the day being strangers, and by the end, you know, you do come out with friends sometimes, if that's what you want. You know, I think the old school way was kind of you'd be a supplier, but nowadays a lot of people are doing this where I guess they're sort of realizing that it is good business sense in a way to become more than a supplier and to contribute to the day as a person and to be involved. And people, I don't have my clients on Facebook or anything, apart from sometimes maybe after the wedding, but I know I really gelled with them more often when I'm doing like multi-day weddings. I do a lot of weekend and destination weddings. You often just naturally become friends with them, and so you know, I'm still pretty friendly with a lot of my couples, which is nice.
Yeah, that is really nice. I know one of the things we've touched on a few times now, but we haven't yet spoken about, is you photograph quite a wide variety of different weddings with different traditions and different religious backgrounds. Could you talk to us a little bit about the differences between sort of the key weddings that you photograph? So I know you photograph a lot of Jewish weddings, you've done some Asian weddings, Western culture weddings. Could you just sort of talk to us about the differences in those?
Yeah, so I would say that I'm not someone who on purposely aims to sort of go out and shoot weddings of a certain culture, of a certain religion. I think I just got kind of semi lucky near the start where I grew up and kind of who I went to school with and all my school friends and stuff. We grew up in sort of North London, very mixed multicultural environment. So my very first wedding, I got into wedding photography by accident. My very first wedding was actually when I was doing my PhD course, one of my friends, it was her mum's second marriage. So, you know, in that sense, like already like I have a rare kind of wedding, you know. And then my second wedding was my boyfriend's best friend, and it was a Nigerian English wedding. So my second wedding was like 300 people, and I didn't know what like a raw file was, and I was like very green and stuff at the time. So I was thrown into the deep end, and so then from after that it became sort of normal for me, I guess, to kind of shoot like a wide range of weddings. And as I attended more, I sort of realized like this is the fun part of it for me. This is you know, kind of what I'm here for. Like if all the weddings I shot were the same, I don't think I'd be as interested in shooting weddings, because it's not that I'm the kind of person where I got into weddings actively thinking, oh, I love weddings. Like at the time I started, like none of my friends were married. I think I was I must have been like 24ish or something. And you know, I wasn't my plan to do it as a full-time job. I thought it'd be just a nice like side earner with a PhD, and I become a psychologist eventually. And then just it took off. So obviously I changed over. But you know, I didn't get into it with any preconception of what a wedding should be like, which I think has been helpful in terms of it's obviously crafted like this style and this, and set me on this path where it's obviously benefiting me and what I've gone on to do. But so I sort of near the start, you know, I photographed. I would still say, you know, I photographed a lot of English weddings at the start, and then I remember how I got into my first Jewish wedding, and it was at it was at an English wedding, and one of the guests was Jewish. And again, this comes back to, you know, how important it is to be comfortable with the couple and to fit in with the guests. The way I shoot is very like, I have a lot of energy, and so I would say I'm all over the place running around. Apparently that's what I look like. I don't know really. That's what I've been told. So one of the guests said to me, "Oh, you know, have you ever shot any Jewish weddings?" And I said, "Oh, no." And she said, "Oh, I think you should consider it, because, you know, I think you really fit in with them. Like, I can see you kind of getting in the space. I can see you kind of getting in the action and moving around. And, you know, our dance halls are really hectic and crazy, and I think you would love it. And you'd have a really good time and whatnot." And I said, "Oh, okay, cool." And I didn't know much of it. And then, but this one wedding guest, and bless her, I you know, I don't even know her name, because she was just a very brief conversation, but probably owe her quite a lot. She went on and basically was continuing to tell people about me for like a few years afterwards. And so I got a few of my first referrals just of this guest just saying to people, "Oh, I've seen this girl, and like, you know, she's not Jewish, but actually she looks like she would be really interesting, and you know, I've seen the photos from this wedding, and she looks like she would do a good job." So I then got lucky because they're one of my first couples, who are one of the couples that I'm still friends with now, Debbie and Ayel, and they're you know, they just seem, I don't know, they seem very popular in the North London sort of young Jewish community, and they work with a lot of community projects and things like that, and they're just really lovely people all around. And I shot their wedding, had the best time, and then from there I like it just spawned. And I think in particular, I think in the Jewish community that they like a lot the word of mouth, basically. So all of that was word of mouth. Like, I almost never really set out or planned to do a lot of Jewish weddings, and then now I end up doing at least sort of 5 or 6 a year. And considering I only do nowadays about, you know, 35 a year max, that is then in a way a sort of a large portion of what I do.
Yeah.
And then when it came to sort of Asian weddings, trying to think what was my first. The first one I ever attended was my friend's Muslim wedding, actually, and I took some photos for her, but I wasn't necessarily putting up the content. Like, I can't remember now like what I put up on my website, but I wasn't necessarily putting the content out there with the aim of attracting, you know, this particular cultural religion or anything. But I think it was maybe a similar vibe, because also when you have an editing style that's quite colourful, that sort of suits Asian sort of outfits a lot, and a lot of it's very colourful, you know. So that sort of maybe works in my favour. But again, I think it was a case of, because people knew that I was willing to sort of elbow into the action, and we have very chaotic weddings, and I was sort of offering a photography service that also is longer than the average hours. So one thing I would say is, back then it's changed very recently, but back then I offered kind of what I refer to as like an unlimited hours package, because in my mind it made sense that logically, if you say that 8 hours is a normal wedding day, that's not really a normal wedding day for many other cultures. That's maybe a normal wedding day for an English wedding, and even maybe not. But if you say like, okay, this is my standard, I'm doing 8 hours, that's like half an Asian wedding or something. So if you kind of want to get into a diverse range of weddings, you almost have to make it clear that you are open-minded or aware of the fact that their timelines are different. You know, and with Jewish weddings, well, their weddings are very long. So often I'll do prep in the morning, both sides, and then the last dance or last song, I should say, is kind of considered an informal, like, but important, like, family dance, where everyone kind of gathers together, and then we'll kind of often like come around in a circle. So they'll kind of like it if you get that. Although, you know, not every Jewish wedding I've done, they've asked me to stay that late. But they're definitely at the start, there were ones where I would say right from the beginning, like right until everyone is packing up and the floors are being swept and stuff. And then with an Asian wedding, you know, when the bride and groom leave, which sometimes is at the end of the day and sometimes it's a bit earlier if they're a bit tired, but they crack a coconut under the wheel of the car or whatever they're exiting in. So there's little traditions that kind of mean that you, in theory, have to stay a bit longer. So they are, yeah, I mean, those are two sort of ones I do regularly, but I have shot a few weddings where just here and there it's been in different religions and cultures. And in terms of the differences between them, it's hard for me to sort of describe succinctly, as you can see me sort of struggling to describe succinctly, because all of them are so different. And I would also just advise people, anyone who sort of, I guess you're here because you're interested in learning a bit more about a range of weddings, within each culture, I mean, within each religion, there are differences there as well. So you sometimes get people asking like, oh, you know, I think someone even asked this week, like, what can I expect from my first Jewish wedding? And my answer is always like, you've got to go and ask the couple, because there's different levels of sort of orthodox and different levels, different sort of mini streams and things like that within each religion. So even now, with the number I've done, I would never assume I knew exactly what was going to happen. Sometimes, like, and I do tend to shoot for the less orthodox end. I shot a couple of orthodox Jewish weddings, but because of my sort of fun style, I think that I sort of get couples who are a bit more kind of like they have like their hookers and things like that. But you know, a lot of them will kind of walking together, so the groom will walk with his parents and the bride will walk with her parents. But you can't always assume that. And then a lot of the things that will always happen will kind of be the ring and like a sort of a drinking of wine underneath the hookah. But you don't know how many times they're going to circle, for example. Like some do a smaller number than others. Same with Asian weddings as well. There's a bit of circling during the ceremony, and the number is different. So you have to kind of really. I definitely recommend basically that you ask every single time. I without a shadow of doubt get like sort of an order of service, or I get a ceremony timeline beforehand.
Do you find, so for people who are like just starting out on varying the types of weddings they do, or if they're looking into shooting Asian weddings or Jewish weddings, do you find that it's better to do your own research, and then at least when you sit down with the couple you can sort of interject some of what you've read, or do you find it's better to go in really open-minded and just like straight up listen to everything that the couple want and what the brief is?
I would go in very open-minded because well, I mean, because I'm doing it for a while now, I'm trying to think of what I did in the earlier days. I don't think I would have ever gone in and sort of said, oh, this is what I read about. In the early days, I'm always honest with the couples anyway. So when I was doing my first few, I would say, oh, I've only shot one before, I've only shot two before. You know, so I'd appreciate if you told me, you know, the do's and don'ts and gave me as much detail as you can about the ceremony, because that will help me do a better job for you. So no, I never really would have gone in predetermining it. Nowadays, because I've got a few under my belt, there's been one or two times where I've sat there and I've sort of known more about what's going to happen in the ceremony than the couple, and they've leant over to me and been like, what happens next? And I'm behind the chair being like, I think you've got to do this in a bit. But you know, like, because a lot of the weddings, you know, being a different ethnicity in England, a lot of the weddings, the couples are of an age where they possibly were born here or something, so they're a bit like me, they're like British born Asian, and so a lot of their guests will actually be English speaking, and then a lot of their guests will also be non-English speaking. So often nowadays they're really good at catering for it, and a lot of the people running the ceremony, which obviously changes based on what religion is, but a lot of people who are running the ceremony are aware of this. And I've had a lot of Asian ceremonies where they'll say stuff in sort of their language, and then they will also actually say stuff in English. And so that's always been really helpful for you as a photographer when you're working, because you're literally just about to be told, and they'll turn to the guests and actually explain, like, now the couple will go around the fire a few times, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, okay, cool. So you're like, this is the bit with this. So you'll kind of remember, you know, from your pre-planning the stuff, but you won't necessarily, I would say don't panic. It feels, I think if you're doing your first wedding, like first non-English wedding, you may sit there and think, oh God, there's a lot to remember. The ceremonies are a lot longer. If you do a civil, it's like, you know, it's 25 minutes, and we know it's like reading, blah, 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 ring, exchange, kiss, blah, blah. And you think, oh God, there's like, they're going to go here, they're going to go there, they're going to stand on some stones, they're going to pound this leaf, they're going to pour some water. But I say, you know, don't worry, because a lot of the time you will find that someone is about to explain it to you about 2 minutes before it happens. And the only thing I found that was worth, I guess, or that was like the harder bit that you had to sort of get used to or learn, was where to stand for the best angle for these moments. And, you know, near the start, definitely at your first, you know, you don't necessarily get the best angle that you could have. And then as time goes on, because you know what's about to happen, then you think, okay, next time I'm going to get more interesting angle. So I'm sure at my first one, I went for safe angles, you know, like I just made sure I got the shot, because obviously you're sort of panicking or whatever about it. But as time went on, then I was like, okay, I'm going to get the shot that I know I normally get, and maybe I'll get a bit closer, and I'll crawl down on the floor, and I'll zoom in on this bit and whatever it is, and come closer. If you have like a videographer that's working with you or something at the time, then it's really handy. And if there's someone who specializes in that wedding that you're at, and the culture of that wedding that you're at, then I really recommend, you know, speaking to them as well, and sort of seeing where they move and following their example, because they're really invaluable. If you make friends with them as well, they'll often be really helpful. Where I've literally had videographers say to me, oh no, we know we're about to come and do this, because they were more aware. At the start, I've definitely had loads of videographers help me out. So if you're new, I would say, you know, be friendly and work with the suppliers that you're with, like be humble in that sense, and make them aware of your inexperience, and assuming they're not. really horrible and like on purposely leave you out in the cold, they often will help you and be really nice. So that's one thing that if you're getting into it for the first time.
Yeah, I feel like there's so much to unpack there and some really useful advice. One of the things you mentioned is sitting down with the couple before they have their wedding day. So I actually wasn't aware of this until quite recently, that there's actually quite a lot of process pre-wedding in what you do as well. And I wondered if you could just go through some of those steps. Obviously, I know you mentioned about some weddings being longer, which, by the way, I think it's amazing that you offered that package so that people weren't put off by the fact that their ceremonies were a lot longer than other people's. But yeah, I guess I'd like to know a little bit more about the process pre-wedding and what you need to do and what you have to do before you even get to the part where you take photographs.
So you mean sort of like organizing with a couple in sense of like, how do I prepare? Okay, so with every couple anyway, after they book, I kind of send them a questionnaire. I use like a client management software, so because otherwise I would not remember everything that I'm doing in my life. But yes, I have like a questionnaire, and so I will ask the standard questions that I think you would ask at every wedding, regardless of you know whether or not it's a culture you're familiar with. But you need to ask the timeline. You need to ask, you know, where you're going to start, where you're going to be, what's needed, what are the necessary shots that they really want. Especially if they're aware that, you know, if you've been honest with them and said, oh, this is only my second Jewish wedding or something, they will definitely tell you like what things they will want you to have. You know, they'll point out to you, oh, you know, the smashing of the glass is very important, this and that and this. So a lot of the time it's just having that conversation, and often I'll just do it really casually over Zoom, or like I said in person before, you know, I'll meet up with them again in person, and we will literally just talk through everything, and they'll almost like walk me through the day a little bit, which is kind of, I think, all you need to do with prep wise. Sometimes, like if it back in the day when it was something that I didn't know what it was, you know, they'd say the name of something to me, we're going to do this, and I'm just like, oh, what does that mean? And then you do have to go on and do a little Google, and just so you have a bearing of what it is. But often a lot of them, they will describe it to you and they'll be really helpful. Obviously it's in their interest to get the best out of you and prepare you as best they can. So couples are never like shy with information about, you know, what to expect beforehand. So once you have that, like sometimes I will look on Google, like just so I can visually know what it looks like. I would say, you know, in the first few, I remember thinking sometimes, I was so aware of, like, I know something's about to happen, but if I don't know what it looks like, it's very hard to spot it. Like there'll be things like, oh, a string will be tied here or something like that, and it's a very small action they're doing sometimes, like in a crowd. One thing I will actually say, which is not related to the pre-planning, but when you're there on the wedding day, it's always worth being near the front of the action, like be on the front row. Don't even, however discreet of photography you are, actually works in your favor in the front row, because some things, I think the picture that just went by, actually, like you can see that if I was 3 people back, I wouldn't be able to see what was going on. So there's a lot of that kind of thing. But no, in terms of pre-planning, I wouldn't say there's much more than just having that dialogue with the couple. I don't ever go into a wedding pretending that I know everything, because, yeah, like I said, even now, like there's weddings where there's a difference in, like there's very small differences in how they choose. Or like couples adapt, you know, especially a lot of modern couples now, they adapt their own cultural systems and cultural traditions. I have a lot of couples where it's like they're from different cultures, so it's not even just like completely an Asian wedding. It'll be like one's Asian and one's English, so they will take a flavor of it, but not do the full set. So you do need to just ask, basically. So no one is ever problematic about asking.
I guess so we've got a lot of questions coming in about lighting, and it's really interesting because I wanted to ask you about lighting as well.
Okay.
In the sense that obviously you're working, especially if you're at sort of weddings that are Asian descent based in England, you're going to have a lot of different skin tones to photograph, which I guess, depending on the weather and the lighting that you have, must be a little more tricky to deal with. And I just kind of wondered like how you go about lighting those situations, how you go about with your camera settings, if you don't mind me asking.
Yeah, so I would probably describe myself as one of those like natural light photographers, but not really, because I think there's times when we don't have natural light. And you know, so I would think that, I think people should think of it more as an available light photography situation. But where I can get away with it, I will use natural light. And to be honest, during a lot of the ceremonies, you can't use lighting sometimes. If I have to use a lighting setup, say for example, when I've had to do it is often so in Jewish culture, there's like kind of like on the Saturday they don't work, so you can't, there's like you can't get married during a certain time window. I think starts. Oh God, correct me if I'm wrong. sometime late on Friday, and it goes through Saturday, and it finishes sometime on Saturday. So basically, I've done a few Jewish weddings on a Saturday where it has to be after sundown, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So therefore, I've had ceremonies very late in the day, in the dark sort of thing. But in that case, when that happens, the couple then does know that you're going to have lighting setups. And I try to avoid this if I can, just because it does add an extra complication. And also because of the nature of the ceremonies where you're wanting to move around, not get different angles and not just stay in one spot. It is quite hard to set up a lighting that then flatters absolutely everyone around the hooker, because you've got the couple in the middle and you've got people holding the hooker if it's held by family and friends, and then you have the parents of both sides underneath it, and then you have the rabbi, and then you have the rabbi's assistant. So you basically have this small square or rectangle that's about like a couple of meters at the most wide, and then you've got to be over the shoulder of all of them whilst not being intrusive, but like you're like like this. So if you've got off-camera flash set up on either sides at the end of the room, the odds are you're going to get a bit of like shadows here and there. It's very hard to sort of quite get that sweet spot. So I mean, a lot of the time you are relying on natural light, but I think when people get married after dark, they kind of know there might be like an atmosphere to the pictures, and it might just be a case of bumping up the ISO. If I'm shooting couples where they're like sort of different skin tones, I think one of your Wex talks tomorrow is going to touch on this. I think Malky is going to talk more detail about photographing different skin tones. I would definitely say if you're interested in that, like, definitely watch her talk, because I think she's a beauty photographer and she's going to really detail this technical behind that. Because I'm a documentary photographer, and also with weddings, part of our job is that we're almost a bit imperfect and we're a bit on the fly, and our job is to kind of roll and adapt the situation and make the best of, I guess, like, hard situations lighting wise. I think you're very rarely going to achieve that studio perfect lighting setup unless you have a very stage style wedding photography. So my honest answer is I don't aim for that perfect sort of look. When I'm editing, I'm mostly thinking of like, as long as it looks realistic to the couple. So my only thought is really, if I have couples of different skin tones, I try and make sure that they look like how they're meant to look. Otherwise, it can be a little bit like strange or something. So that's my main aim when I'm editing. And if I'm shooting the couple in a couple shot where I do have more control over positioning, then obviously, like, whoever is darker, I will put on the side that's sort of like the sun side, and I'll just make sure that they're better lit if they're by a window, they go window side. But when you're in a ceremony, often you can't control that, because where they sit and where they stand is more related to the religious significance. So that's what happens. So yeah.
Thank you so much. No, it's really interesting to hear, because obviously the thing about wedding photography is that it is very off the cuff. Like, when you get there on the day, obviously people behave how they behave, and you can't necessarily control them as much as you would in other environments. But your pictures are absolutely beautiful. And we've had a question come in about attracting prospective clients. And I guess one of my questions around that would be selection and presentation of your work. So obviously you have an Instagram, you have a website. How do you present yourself as an all-round wedding photographer? Or
so the general sort of marketing go-to is that you put out the portfolio that you want to attract, right? And this is very true. This definitely works. So if you want a specific niche of clients, then that is what you should be putting on your website, and that's what you should be narrowing down through to be. So for me, my personal interest is that, well, my personal sort of, I guess, goal of what I want to attract is I only want couples really that just love the work, and they're on board with the kind of the ethos that I put out there about, that this is more about looking happy in your day. I don't want you to look like I don't want you to feel like you have to look a certain way. I want you to sort of feel comfortable, and these are things that are more important to me than that perfect cerulean blue or whatever it is. And I do sort of want couples who are a bit more easygoing and able to roll with chaos, because I don't know, I find that fun. But so my niche, weirdly, is almost like anyone who loves my work, but that doesn't really sound quite right. If you are wanting to attract a certain aesthetic, then you just have to literally put on what you want to attract. And if you don't have that existing portfolio yet and you're looking to build it, one way you can kind of work around that, I think, is doing something I started a long time ago, which is kind of like a bucket list. So I literally put a bucket list on my website that says, these are the things I would like to shoot, and this is a checklist. And as I achieve them, I would check them off. And I would offer like a little mini discount, like a very small one, just to sort of say, like, for the first one that this fits, then I will do it. And I did that not really for a specific aesthetic, more for literally like venues I really loved, or like ideas I thought were really fun. And I haven't managed to actually get quite a lot of it, so it does work. One of them that took me 8 years to get was Natural History Museum wedding, and I finally got that one in. I was like, yes. But there's little, like, I just put crazy things on mine because, like I said, for me, the joy of kind of doing weddings is about the adventure and the different stuff. So I put stuff like an underwater wedding, which I have almost got once, unbelievably, but like, I sort of know realistically that may never come around. But even by having that, that has already told other couples, even if they aren't having an underwater wedding, they've understood, okay, this girl is game for it. This girl is like up for coming along and seeing something new. And I think just making that clear and communicating that really clearly on your website is enough. Even on my like frequently asked questions bit on my website, it's one of the first things I put up at the top. Is I think the question, I think I phrased it as something like, oh, do we have to be cool cats to book you? And I say no, I'm basically really happy to shoot for people of all different sizes, shapes, traditions. I shoot, I think sometimes people do assume that I shoot only non-traditional weddings, but actually I shoot a lot of traditional weddings as well. And they'll say to me, oh, we're having a very normal wedding, is that okay? And I was like, look, if you kind of are into the style, there's nothing, it's not like, oh, it has to be crazy, it has to be fun and wacky all the time. So there is that, I appreciate that tradition and non-tradition as, equally. That's kind of my personal choice, but I think everyone's got to craft what they want. Like everyone's got to sort of choose the clients they like to aim for based on their own interests, and that just happens to be mine. But yeah,
I guess it goes back to that social representation, in this case more sort of social promotion. But obviously if the only thing you put on your website is your stereotypical English bride, then couples who are maybe a little less insecure or looking for something a little bit different, they might not be interested in that work because they feel that you don't suit them, even if you've actually done loads of that work.
No, yes, completely. And like, actually, one thing that I will say is I remember when I first started, people would say stuff like, oh, put on like, you want to put on your most like your best looking couples. And I remember thinking, oh no, that's not for me, because I don't want to, I know in theory people will say like, oh, it's easier to shoot couples who all look like models and they all look very good looking. And there could be some truth in that, but it's not something I want to ascribe to, because it's like saying, if I have someone who looks average, and this is the truth, right? Okay, the average person looks average. Like we're all average looking just by the pure maths of like the average is the majority of the population. So I think I would not like to engage in something personally where it might make people feel like I'm not good enough to be photographed. Like I'm not as beautiful as this person. I'm not as beautiful as all these people on this website of this photographer. And I love this person's photos, but like I don't see myself, being on this website. And that's not me knocking anyone who sort of does choose to shoot for like, very like high-end beautiful couples and stuff like that, because there are definitely a lot of photographers out there who want to do that. Absolutely fine. I just know for me that's not what I'm into. So I on purposely will put up people regardless of their look. And one of my favorite pictures of all time, which has been in the slideshow, but I won't highlight who it is just to not sort of call her out. But I remember when I met her, she's an older bride and she's a larger bride, and she said to me, she said, oh, I like your work, but I feel a little bit like I'm old and ugly. And like, do you want to shoot for me? And I almost like, I felt in the meeting like, so, I don't know, like, I felt like I'm not like angry for her, that she's obviously like, we've created this world where you are getting married and you're excited and you're happy and you still feel that you are not good enough. Like that to me was just, that's what I'm trying to always fight against, I think. And I remember saying to her, no, I will shoot your wedding for you. Like, she's like, oh, we're not exciting. We're not like young and hip and cool. And I was like, no, like I want to shoot your wedding for you. And the picture of her, what delights me is that it's one of my most awarded pictures because of the moment, because she's doing something that's very funny, and it just happened to be a very interesting moment, and she was very relaxed with me on the day and things like that. And every time it gets an award, I send it to her or I like tag her in it. And because I want her to know that like the picture of her was worth something, and people liked it, and it didn't matter like whether or not she was young, hip or cool or whatever, or looked a certain way. And I've had a few moments like that in my wedding photography career where it's reminded me that this is what matters to me. I had someone who said they almost didn't book a wedding photographer because they hated how they looked in pictures, and then they got persuaded by friends because who said, oh no, you'll regret it if you don't have a photographer. And can you imagine like kind of someone feeling being made to feel that much like that, that much doubt in the way they look that they feel like they aren't even worth having their memories recorded. But anyway, they came to me and they said, oh, you seem like you'd be the least the least worst one of the lot. And I said, okay, brilliant. That's what you want to hear when you get the booking. You're like the least traumatizing person that they could imagine having on their day. And when she sent me the when I sent her the photos and she emailed me back the feedback, she was literally like, she's like, I just cried. And she's like, I've never thought I looked good ever. And all my pictures were of her, where there was no Photoshop, there was nothing like that. It was just that I sort of tried to make her feel comfortable on the day. I tried to encourage her to just enjoy her day, with her husband, and I just took time at the moment so that she was always laughing in shots and having a good time and being herself and being around her friends. And we're a generation. I think the generation that's getting married now, we're the ones who, when we were kids, a photo for us was standing in front of our parents with a sort of film camera and being made to stand really still for like 30 seconds. And that's how people think. People come to me and they sort of hate having their photo taken because they think that's what having a photo taken is like. So they would probably have grown up then just being used to taking selfies or being used to taking that and trying to sort of perfect it. And when you try and pose for something, if you're someone who's already self-conscious and awkward, you don't feel comfortable about it. So it is for a lot of people with having their wedding photos, it might be the first time that they've been shot in a natural way, they've been shot in a documentary way by someone else. So it is a shock to them to know that's what they look like when they laugh, and that's what they, and I've always had, like, I used to have on my website, which I think I've removed recently, but I did have on my website this emphasis that I am into like double chin laughter, because I think the single tear cry, or the sort of the elegant cries or the elegant laugh, is something that some people do naturally, but very few people do. And realistically, when people laugh, there's nostrils and there's teeth and there's chins, and I actually think that's how you can tell like someone's laughing at their fullest, like unfiltered, genuine, like they're feeling it. So I feel like that's what I want to show, like that's the laughter I want to show, that really, like, you can tell there's full energy there and it's real, and that really gets me going. So yeah, I just said to her, all I did was like, and she was like, I can't believe you look that way. And I said, all I did was I just showed you as you were, basically. So you had it all along. And I shot that person's wedding like 6 years ago, and I still have that like really in my mind all the time in that email.
I think it's really important as photographers, especially wedding photographers, that we remember that people can be self-conscious. I mean, I've seen one of my friends got married, and this photographer used to post their pictures every day of all the weddings they did, and then they didn't post hers. And although it's only social media and it seems really irrelevant to her, she wanted to know why. If you're putting one up of everyone else, like, why not mine? Why not me? Was there something wrong with my day? And I think it is really important to remember that although it's a job and it's photography, and we're fortunate enough that there are awards, it's people. And like you said, it's about capturing them at their happiest and making them feel special on a day that quite rightly so is about them.
I've heard things like that before, actually, of people sort of saying that, and from the photographer side of you, it's like people saying, oh, this bride got in touch with me and she didn't she asked me why her wedding wasn't up. I think that's something that, like, every photographer has the right to run their business the way they want. I'm not going to knock that. I think the thing is, the situation has been created. We've almost like created a monster in that sense, that people will notice that and think it reflects on their day. Mm-hmm. And that's what I mean. It kind of shouldn't have been ever like, am I good enough to be on this person's blog? Because it shouldn't detract from the day, because the wedding day was still the same. And really, it shouldn't have been about, whether or not you were good enough to qualify for the marketing thing. It should have been that she just wanted to enjoy herself, and that was it. But I know because we have magazines, and we have this aesthetic sold to you for couples when they're planning on getting married and they're doing the planning process. I think a lot of that is fed to them as important. And I weirdly kind of say, I have this on my site, that like, I'm not very weddingy as a wedding photographer. Like, I'm never telling couples that this and this and that is important, like all these material things are important, which I know is a bit controversial. And again, it's not me knocking anyone's work, or not me saying to couples, oh, you can't have nice, pretty things on your wedding day. I think it's more that if you should feel free to want what you want and what you're comfortable with wanting. And I think that's really important, to just make people aware that you've got a choice, and your wedding day will be no different and no less or no more based on what pretty things you have. So
yeah, absolutely. So I know we've got a few minutes left, so we've got a couple of questions from the audience. Somebody's asked about additional lighting. So if you're just beginning as a wedding photographer and you just don't have quite as much kit, could you recommend, you know, sort of one lens or two lenses and a piece of lighting that you feel are very essential to your kit?
Yeah, I mean, lighting wise, I would definitely say every wedding photographer should have at least one flash in their bag. For me as a Fujifilm user, like we have a more limited range of like what's compatible with Fujifilm. So I know if you're on different brands, it's probably different. But Godox is probably the best thing for us. My go-to, the flash that would be big enough is the Godox. I think it is called the 860 Mark II with like the two eyes, like the Roman numeral eyes two, and it's a lithium ion version, which is the V. And I mean, ideally you get two of those if you want to do anything with off-camera flash. If you're just sticking to on-camera flash, then obviously you just need the one for the one body you have. If you have the option to sort of rent, if you're starting out, you have the option to rent or you know, buy the second body. Always try and have a backup body because you know, equipment does fail, not very often, but it does. And you never want to be in that position. And a wedding day is one of those ones where you can't reschedule. So it's very important, I think, if you are starting out and you have no kit, you know, you want the one camera. If you're going to have a lens, like I have seen people shoot like a whole wedding on like a nifty 50 prime lens, which is not done as much anymore, but I know back in the day that was like something that people would actually do and manage, with 50 being kind of like a very, on a full frame, a normal perspective, right? So I personally, I choose a 23 1.4 on Fujifilm, which is kind of the equivalent of a 35 in a full frame, because I like the fact that it's almost a bit of photojournalistic perspective. So it's slightly wider than normal. And for me, that's kind of my go-to because of the way I shoot as a documentary style photographer. If you're someone that has a more like fine arty style or more classic style, you may prefer a longer length because it's not the most flattering, you know, focal length sort of thing. Always, it's more the storytelling focal length where you want to see more in the picture. But if you're the kind of person where you're taking portraits of people a lot more, people want something longer. So if you had to carry it down to like sort of the body and two lenses, you know, I mean, for me with primes, the two lenses as a 23 and a 56, and then the Godox flash. If you work with zooms, then I would go for the zoom range that is somewhere between that focal length range, if that makes sense. Primes, like obviously because they're faster, you can work in low light. And like I said, a lot of ceremonies they don't let use flash. That's kind of why I lean into primes rather than zooms. Having said that, a lot of people use zooms at weddings.
Yeah. So. And then Paul has asked, I guess this varies between traditions, different wedding cultures, and obviously just in general, different people's weddings. But he's asked, do you have like a list of guests before you go in that you know that you want to get pictures of? So he said, you know, like grandmothers or mothers or.
Oh, so I do have, as well as asking the couple about the group shots that they want, I do have what I call like a special person list. So I asked them in this box, is there anyone who I should be aware of that's notable? And by that, the way I describe it is people who may or may not be in the group shot, who are possibly a bit camera shy. So I said, don't worry about anyone who's like very loud or at the front of everything, or they're in their immediate family, because I probably, odds are I will get them and see them. But if there's someone who's important to you, but you know they're a bit of a wallflower, or you know that they have sort of like, you know, they just don't look sort of like say for example, you get a grandpa who always looks grumpy, okay, for want of a better word. You'll always have like a grandpa who's always looks grumpy, but he's dead important. But because obviously I'm looking for action, I'm looking for smiles, I'm looking for emotions. If a wedding guest that's important isn't very emotive, I may miss them. So that's the kind of person that I'm aware that I may miss. And I do ask couples beforehand to sort of identify them to me. And then what I do is on the day, I ask for the name really. And then what I do is on the day, I will actually go up to like a bridesmaid or someone, not necessarily the couple, but I'll go to someone close to the couple and I'll ask them for them to point out to me who these people are. When I have the weddings that are very big in number, then that becomes more important. I would say when I'm doing Jewish weddings, my Asian weddings, that list becomes more prevalent, because there will be like, you know, a group of friends who've flown over from Australia. There will be, you know, this really important person that was like their nanny like early in their life and things like that aren't the immediate family, because often then, you know, they'll have like very big community, like sort of like a very strong sense of community and sort of like the sheer number of guests, I think, means that you're in this position where there's a lot of really important people. So that's one way I get around that, especially as a documentary shooter, because you are not able to guarantee 100% of. I would always say, don't ever say to a couple, you know, I'm going to get 100% of your guests, because if you do, that's asking yourself to be shot in the foot. if you miss one and that one person was hiding in the toilet the whole time bombing or something, you know, that's the person that they're going to be like, where is the person of Auntie Viv? And you're just like, who was Auntie Viv? And also, I don't know if you guys ever feel this way, but I find by the time I'm like seeing everything and it's like, you know, a few hours and hours in, like when I see faces, I kind of remember some faces if I'm dead honest, you know. So I will definitely not be able to look at a person and think, have I shot loads of that person or not? So having that special people list kind of just covers you in a sort of, from a sensible liability point of view, you know, it kind of makes sure that you understand without assuming a family dynamic. Because that's one other thing, you know, you obviously can't assume that there are two sets of parents and this sort of thing. So that's the most delicate way of going about it, I think. Again, the same approach as going into, you know, cultural ceremonies that you're unaware of. You kind of, by being open-minded and asking, that is your best default, and make sure you don't get anything wrong.
And then I guess my last question to you would be, where do you see yourself going next? Or a better question with your bucket list would be, what's next for you that you really want to do?
Oh, that's a good question. Because you've asked me that at a point in my life where you can't tell on the Skype that I'm sort of 31 weeks pregnant. So, so my life's that, and that's why I mentioned at some point there's some things that are taken off my website, because I used to do, you know, really long hours, and obviously my life's sort of going the family way. So I'm now restricting hours only based on that, really. Like up until a few months ago, I was offering limited packages, but I think realistically I've got to cut back on the 3 a.m. you know, sort of because Uber home from somewhere in central London, and you know, get home to a baby. So for me, that I'm actually almost dialing them back in a way and kind of calming things down, which hopefully means that there'll be loads of amazing like weekender and exciting boozy destination weddings out there if they want to take that I'm not able to fulfill anymore. But yeah, so I'm sort of wanting to sort of pare it down, and I'm definitely thinking about going back to you know, what made me fall in love with photography years ago, which is that a very much more about the people. I would say somewhere in the middle of my career, there was a point where, you know, I did spend a lot of time looking at you know, what other wedding photography there was out there, and you get sort of easily swayed, even if you're not trying to be. You sort of you find yourself shooting like a bouquet shot in the style of one that you wouldn't have taken before, because you know it works for a blog, or you know that's just will work on Instagram or something. And I've been through that phase where I felt swayed by that. And so I would like to kind of hunker back down to focusing on enjoying each wedding, in terms of making sure that I'm at weddings where, you know, the couple is really fun and the guests are really fun and I'm having a good time and I'm connecting with people and I'm feeling very present at those weddings. Because I'm sort of thinking, especially with the fact that we've obviously all been away from work for like a year and a half-ish or something like that. Spending your time is actually one of the most important things that we have in life. Like, it's not really, you know, about needing it to be a full-time job anymore for me, per se, because I know I'm going part-time-ish. So I want to make sure that if I'm away from home and I'm away from my family, that I'm enjoying my time there. And, you know, it's like my work-life balance is good and things like that. So that's a really odd question that's a really odd answer to give in a way, because it's almost like saying like I'm retiring, which I'm not. But like, in a way, I'm readjusting my life perspective, which maybe many people are based on what's happened. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm going next.
Thank you so much. No, that's really interesting. I think, you know, the last year has definitely been a challenge for wedding photographers, if that even needs to be said. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to hear your perspective, and thank you so much for sharing it with us. I do think it's really important as photographers that we remember what we're trying to achieve and what we're trying to portray, and then how it makes people feel. And I think your work is just so beautiful and really, really unique, and it just kind of emphasizes that feeling of everyone feeling happy and lovely, like you mentioned at the beginning. So thank you so much for being here and for talking to us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Just for everyone who's watching, we are running a series of events this week for our Change the Image campaign. You can go onto the events website at Wex Photo Video and you'll see that there's more coming up, including one with Ron Timmerhin on the making of fortitude, which happens on Friday. So thank you all for joining. Thank you to Fujifilm for supporting, and thank you so much, Marianne, for sharing your journey with us.